Shabbat Shalom, friends. Shabbat Shalom. Nice to be with you. This is Rabbi Elliot Schoenberg of the Jewish Center. This week we are reading Parashat Korach. Now, we're always trying to find a connection between the Torah reading and something you can talk about that people will feel that connects to them. And some parshiot are easier, some parshiot are harder. What rabbis say among themselves about Parashat Korach, it's probably the easiest. Why is that? Korach is about an argument between Jews. And if we're looking for an example of something that Jews do, Jewish behavior, that's argue. That's something we do well. So we could give this talk on any parsha, on any week, about Parashat Korach. So what is it about this argumentation that takes place during this parsha? Our rabbis say that there is a machloket l'shem shamayim. There is an argument for the sake of heaven, and a machloket lo l'shem shamayim. A machloket, an argument that is not for the sake of heaven. And what's the difference? Machloket l'shem shamayim, that is an argument that takes place between Hillel and Shammai. And what's the classic example of that? How do you light the menorah on Hanukkah? Do you go up? Do you light one candle and then the second night 2 candles? Or do you start with 8 candles and go down from 8 and the second night 7? That's a machloket l'shem shamayim. That's an argument for the sake of heaven, and that kind of argument should always and could always take place. What is a machloket lo l'shem shamayim? That is an argument between Korach and Moses, exemplified by Korach. And what's that example? Well, if you need to have a little bit of tchelet, a little bit of blue in every tzitzit, in every talit, Korach asks, what about if you have a garment, if you have a talit, that's all blue? And then he put it on, according to the Midrash, to demonstrate kind of his in front of Moses what was going on. That's a machloket lo l'shem shamayim. And that's an argument not for the sake of heaven. Let's look at it a little bit more specifically. What can we learn? What can we learn? What is an example of a machloket lo l'shem shamayim? So if you read the text, it says, Vayikach Korach. Now Korach, son of Yizchar, etc., but took himself along with Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliab, and on son of Pelech, descendants of Reuven, Vayikumu lifnei Moshe, to rise up against Moses. Beginning of the pasuk says Vayikach in the singular, and then because there was more than one combatant, there was Korach, there was Datan, there was Aviram, Vayikumu. Of course, they rose up, that it was in the plural. It's in the singular. And what does that teach us? I asked my bat mitzvah student this week what she thought the answer was. And she was right on. She said, a machloket lo l'shem shamayim is something that's selfish, something that an individual does only for their own sake. That would be lo l'shem shamayim. And if it was for the sake of the community, for everyone's concern, that would be l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. And that my bat mitzvah this week, Eleanor, was completely right, because that's why it says vayikach in the singular, to show that Korach was only out for himself, and he was selfish. There's a second comment that I would like to look at, vayikach. Why is it in the singular? Because it says about Korach that he didn't earn it. He didn't demonstrate his own reasons for being able to assume leadership. He didn't give his biography. He just criticized Moses. So he was looking to become the next leader of the Jewish people, to replace Moses by criticizing Moses, not being able to demonstrate what was in his biography and why he should be able to assume the leadership. And then there's a third explanation by Yikach about why it's in the singular. That's from the Targum Onkelos. And Onkelos says, Vayipalge, that Korach decided to separate himself from the community. He decided to look at the argument for the sake of what he could get out of it, to uproot all of the leadership principles that Moses had established, not to transform the system, but to uproot it. He saw nothing of value in the system as it was. He wanted to uproot it. Machloket lo l'shem shamayim, an argument that is not for the sake of heaven. Machloket l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven. Do we have a modern example of that? And here I would like to share with you a story about one of my heroes, the Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis. Brandeis is one of my heroes, not just because I graduated from Brandeis University, but because he demonstrated that not only was he an excellent lawyer, but he was a Jewish leader. Between 1914 and 1918, he was the head of the American Zionist Foundation about how to be a Zionist long before we had the Jewish state. Brandeis is one of my heroes. He did an argument before the Supreme Court when he was a lawyer, arguing for rights of women, for a very famous case about laundresses and that they should be limited in the hours that they were to be worked. He was looking out that they should be treated well before the law. He did not argue just from legal precedents. He created something that became known as the Brandeis Brief. He argued from medical literature. He argued from sociological literature. He wanted to show statistics that showed that working long hours damaged women and damaged them in the society in which they worked. And he won the case against the employers at the time. And it was heralded as a way to change how you argued before the Supreme Court. Years later, Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued again before the Supreme Court. She said, Brandeis was one of my heroes. I love the way that he changed the way you could argue in court. I didn't agree in how he processed the women's rights issue. Women were not to be treated differently. They were to be treated equally. She argued, again, using a Brandeis brief, fighting for the rights of women, that women should be treated equal before the law. So here we have a machloket l'shem shamayim. We have a debate between later Justice Brandeis and Justice Ginsburg, arguing for the rights of women. They disagreed in exactly what those rights might be, but it was a machloket l'shem shamayim. It was a way of making an argument that still stands today because it was for the betterment of society. We thank Moses. We thank Justice Brandeis. We thank Justice Ginsburg for having a machloket l'shem shamayim. We will always argue, and arguing is good, but our arguments should be l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Shabbat shalom, my friends. Shabbat shalom, my dear friends. And as we gather around the Friday night table, maybe we're going to have an argument this week, but make sure that argument is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Thank you so much for being here.